The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place where decisions were made quietly and lives were rearranged without ceremony. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing in pale rectangles on the floor. At the center of it all sat Marcus Hale, composed, confident, already victorious in his own mind. He didn't look at his wife. Not once. Marcus had perfected the posture of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. His tailored suit rested effortlessly on his shoulders. His hands were relaxed, folded loosely as if he were waiting for a delayed flight, not the legal erasure of a woman he had spent 14 years dismantling. Across the aisle, Elena Hale sat alone. No entourage, no whispered consultations, no legal theater. Just her, a straight-backed chair, and a slim, weathered folder resting on her lap. It was old. The edges had softened with time. The clasp was scratched, dulled from years of being opened and closed by careful hands. She kept one palm over it, as though it might drift away if she didn't. Elena's eyes stayed forward. She had learned long ago that meeting Marcus's gaze only fed him. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the final submissions. The case had moved quickly, too quickly. The numbers had aligned, the paperwork had flowed smoothly, and the narrative had already been written by better-funded attorneys and sharper suits. Marcus had made sure of that. He had stripped Elena of access before she even realized the doors were closing, accounts frozen under technicalities, properties transferred under obscure clauses, business holdings rerouted through shell entities bearing names she didn't recognize anymore. Each move had been legal, clean, invisible. That was Marcus's gift. He didn't break rules, he hollowed them out. He leaned toward his attorney, murmuring something that drew a small, satisfied smile. They had rehearsed this ending. The judge would speak, the assets would be allocated, Elena would leave with what the law allowed her to have, which was almost nothing, and Marcus would walk away lighter. The judge began to speak. Given the evidence presented, the court finds... Marcus shifted slightly, already anticipating the weightless relief of finality. Elena remained still. She remembered the first time Marcus had told her she was lucky to have him. They had been standing in a narrow kitchen years ago, when success was still a rumor and hunger had sharpened every word. He had said it gently then, as advice. Later, it became instruction. Over the years, he had taught her silence. He corrected her speech in public, praised her compliance in private, and reminded her that stability came from obedience. When the businesses grew, when the invitations multiplied, when their names appeared in places she had never imagined, Marcus made sure her presence faded. By the time the marriage collapsed, Elena had already been erased. Or so Marcus believed. The judge's voice continued, methodical, precise. Each sentence felt like a door closing. Marcus's attorney nodded along, confident. There were no surprises left. They had accounted for everything. Everything except the quiet woman with the old folder. Elena felt the familiar weight in her chest as the legal language pressed down on her. She had been here before, metaphorically, moments where resistance seemed pointless, where survival meant enduring. But endurance had taught her something Marcus never learned. Silence is not emptiness, it is storage. She let her eyes drift just briefly to the folder. Inside were documents she had never mentioned, papers that predated the marriage, signatures that carried weight beyond balance sheets, a name that once frightened men like Marcus, back when reputation still mattered more than money. The judge paused, adjusting his glasses again. Marcus smiled. The judge prepared to finish the sentence that would end it all. Elena stood. The movement was subtle, almost apologetic, but it broke the rhythm of the room. Chairs creaked, heads turned. Marcus frowned for the first time, irritation flickering across his face. "Your Honor," Elena said. Her voice was calm, unembellished. It carried no plea, just presence. The judge hesitated. "Mrs. Hale, your counsel has already—" "I understand. I only need to submit one document." Marcus exhaled sharply, a quiet laugh escaping before he could stop it. He leaned back, crossing his arms, indulgent. Desperate gestures at the end were common. He had planned for theatrics. Elena walked forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of memory. She placed the folder on the clerk's desk with care, aligning it squarely, as if respect itself mattered. The judge glanced down, then froze. His hand hovered over the page. His eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but recognition. The air in the courtroom changed, tightening like a held breath. Marcus leaned forward. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to draw a glance from the bench. The judge did not answer him. He looked at Elena instead, and for the first time that day, truly saw her. The judge's mouth opened to speak, then stopped, dead mid-sentence. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Marcus felt it before he understood it. Something had shifted. Something he had missed. Something that carried a name.
They spoke of assets and timelines, of marital contributions, of emotional instability, hers. They described her as disengaged, uncooperative, financially naive. They described him as patient, as burdened, as generous beyond reason. They never raised their voices. That was the cruelty of it. Mara listened as her life was flattened into bulletproof sentences. She listened as the house she had lived in for 13 years was referred to as premarital property, as the accounts she had helped build were framed as executive compensation, as her absence from the workforce, years spent raising their son, managing the home, caring for Ethan's mother, was described as personal choice. The judge asked if she had representation. Mara shook her head once. A murmur moved through the room, not sympathy, curiosity, the kind that watches a collapse. Ethan finally turned toward her then, just enough to see her profile, just enough to smile. It wasn't wide, it wasn't cruel, it was precise. He believed the rules didn't apply to him because he had written them first. When the judge asked Mara if she wished to respond, the room seemed to lean forward. She stood slowly. She did not look at Ethan. "I don't disagree with the timeline," she said. Her voice was steady, soft, untrained. Ethan's attorney nodded, already sensing surrender. "I don't disagree with the assets as listed," Mara continued. The attorney smiled. The judge made a note. "I only disagree," she said, pausing, "with what's missing." The pause was brief, almost nothing, but something shifted. Ethan's smile faded by a degree. The judge looked up. "What do you believe is missing, Miss Hale?" the judge asked. Mara swallowed. Her hands tightened on the blue folder. "I don't know how to say it the way lawyers do, but I know what I lived." The judge waited. Mara opened the folder. Inside were documents, not many, a few pages, old bank statements, a photocopy of a deed, a handwritten ledger in neat, patient ink. Ethan's attorney objected immediately. "Improper submission, no foundation, no authentication." The judge held up a hand. "Miss Hale," the judge said, "without counsel, the court cannot—" "I understand," Mara said quickly. "I just want the court to know that there are things I wasn't allowed to see and things I was told didn't matter." Ethan leaned back in his chair. This was theater to him, a final performance before the inevitable. The judge instructed Mara to submit the folder to the clerk for review, explaining that without proper filings it would not be entered into evidence. Mara nodded. She walked the folder forward. As she handed it over, her fingers lingered on the edge just for a second. Not fear, something else. Memory. The clerk placed the folder on the bench. The judge glanced at it, then back at Mara. "Miss Hale," the judge said, "without counsel, the court cannot—" "I understand," Mara said quickly. "I just want the court to know that there are things I wasn't allowed to see and things I was told didn't matter." Ethan leaned back in his chair. This was theater to him, a final performance before the inevitable. The judge instructed Mara to submit the folder to the clerk for review, explaining that without proper filings, it would not be entered into evidence. Mara nodded. She walked the folder forward. As she handed it over, her fingers lingered on the edge, just for a second. Not fear, something else. Memory. The clerk placed the folder on the bench. The judge glanced at it, then back at Mara. "Miss Hale," the judge said, "this court has to work within procedure. I strongly advise you to seek legal representation." "I tried," Mara said, "but I didn't have access to our accounts." She said "our" without emphasis, as if it still meant something. The judge sighed. "The court can grant a brief continuance." Ethan's attorney stood instantly. "Your Honor, this case has already exceeded reasonable delay. My client has complied fully." Ethan raised a finger, barely perceptible. The attorney stopped. "Your Honor," Ethan said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, reasonable. "I'm prepared to be generous. I believe dragging this out will only cause more harm." He turned to Mara then, fully. "Let's finish this," he said, softly. It sounded like mercy. The judge considered, then nodded. "No continuance," the judge ruled. "We'll proceed." Mara returned to her seat. She did not cry. That disappointed some people. The proceedings moved quickly after that. Final statements, summary recommendations, numbers spoken aloud that sounded unreal when attached to her life. When it was over, the judge announced the preliminary ruling. Ethan would retain the house, the majority of liquid assets, primary decision-making authority.
The collapse did not arrive with noise. It arrived with notifications. Accounts flagged, transfers halted, authorizations revoked. The systems Julian trusted more than people began rejecting him without explanation. By the time his phone stopped vibrating, he already understood what that silence meant. Evelyn had not taken anything. She had reclaimed it. Within 48 hours, auditors requested records Julian could not immediately produce. The structures he had layered for efficiency now demanded transparency. Each shortcut he had taken revealed another thread that led back to him. The investigation widened, not because of Evelyn's actions, but because of Julian's past choices. Deferred filings, aggressive valuations, internal memos written with the confidence that no one would ever read them aloud. Now they were being read carefully. Julian met with lawyers who spoke differently than before. Less assurance, more caution. Words like exposure and escalation replaced certainty. He tried to negotiate time. Time, he learned, was no longer his. When the formal notice arrived, it was brief. Assets frozen pending review. Travel restricted. Cooperation required. Criminal proceedings followed quietly. There were no cameras when Julian was escorted from his office building for the last time. No audience when his board voted unanimously to remove him. No sympathy when partners distanced themselves with statements drafted by people who once praised his leadership. The courtroom returned weeks later for the final ruling. Evelyn entered alone again. This time, the room felt different. The judge's tone was measured, unhurried. The findings were clear. The trust was valid. The concealment was documented. The attempt to erase it through marital dissolution had failed. Full control was restored. Julian did not look at Evelyn. He stared at the table in front of him, hands folded tightly, posture diminished. The man who once filled rooms now occupied as little space as possible. The judge concluded without flourish. "This court recognizes the integrity of preparation," he said, "and the consequences of arrogance." Evelyn stood. She did not smile. She did not speak. She collected her briefcase and turned toward the exit. Julian finally looked up. She met his eyes only briefly. Not with triumph, with distance. Outside, the light was clean and ordinary. People moved past the courthouse, unaware that something final had ended inside. Evelyn paused on the steps, breathing evenly, feeling the weight she had carried for years finally lift. She walked away with what she had always owned. The lesson remained behind. Power that depends on silence misunderstands it. Silence is
Yes, Your Honor. And Crown Holdings East is owned by a parent company, the attorney said quickly. The judge's eyes lifted, which was never disclosed to the beneficiary. Silence. Rebecca Lynn stood now. The parent company, she said, was created 3 weeks before the first agreement Miss Hale signed. Its sole purpose was to obscure beneficial control. She placed a document on the bench. This shows internal correspondence acknowledging that disclosure would complicate consent. Elias stood abruptly. This is outrageous. The judge did not look at him. Mr. Crown, he said, you will remain seated. Elias remained standing. The judge turned slowly then, eyes finally meeting his. Sit, he repeated. Elias sat. The judge exhaled once, controlled. This court does not appreciate being used to launder bad faith. He turned back to Mara. Ms. Hale, you appear without counsel, yet you arrive with evidence most represented parties never find. Mara spoke softly. My father believed paperwork outlives people, he said. He taught me where to look. The judge nodded. It appears he also taught you when to wait. Elias felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. The judge continued. The court will not rule on summary judgment today. A pause. Instead, he said, the court refers this matter for review of potential fraud, misrepresentation, and conspiracy to conceal beneficial ownership. The word conspiracy landed like a crack through stone. Elias's attorney stood again, voice strained. Your Honor. Enough, the judge said. He closed the folder. Outside, sirens passed distantly, unrelated, but the sound threaded through the room like omen. Elias looked again at the envelope. At Mara. For the first time, he understood something had been built beneath him while he was admiring the height of his own position. And he could not.
The folder was archived, still intact. Because power, she learned, is loud, but truth only needs to be documented once, and arrogance, given enough room, always signs its own ending.
Ethan arrived early the next morning. He had slept little, not from fear. Fear still felt premature, but from irritation, the kind that comes when control slips in small, unacceptable ways. His attorneys were already inside the courtroom, speaking in low voices that stopped when he approached. The blue folder was there again, thicker now, duplicated, tabbed, integrated. It no longer looked harmless. Mara entered without announcement, no lawyer at her side, not yet. She took the same seat as before, hands folded, eyes forward. Ethan did not look at her. The judge entered. The room stood, sat. Before we proceed, the judge said, the court has reviewed the findings of the financial audit and the supplemental analysis. The judge's voice was steady. That was the final warning Ethan ignored. Mr. Hale, the judge continued, you certified under oath that your disclosures were complete and accurate. Yes, Ethan said. The judge nodded once. Judicial Investigator Cross. Cross stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Ethan. He spoke to the record. The audit identified 7 material omissions, he said, 2 property transfers, 3 accounts, 1 shell entity, 1 falsified authorization. Ethan's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Cross continued. The pattern demonstrates intent to mislead the court and deprive the opposing party of marital assets. A pause. In plain terms, Cross said, this was not negligence. Ethan stood. This is absurd, he said. My wife had no lawyer. She didn't understand what she was submitting. Those notes— The judge raised a hand. Ms. Hale's understanding is no longer the issue, the judge said. Your conduct is. The judge turned a page. Based on the evidence, this court is vacating the prior ruling. The words landed without force. That was worse. Gasps moved through the room. Ethan's attorneys whispered urgently. Too late. Further, the judge said, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney for review of potential criminal liability, including perjury and fraud. Ethan sat slowly. He had never imagined the word criminal attached to his name. Cross closed his briefcase. The bailiff stepped forward, not to arrest him, not yet, but to stand closer than before. The judge addressed Mara for the first time that day. Ms. Hale, the judge said, the court recognizes that you acted without counsel due to restricted access to marital funds. Mara stood. Yes, Your Honor. The court is appointing counsel effective immediately, the judge said, fees to be paid from assets previously concealed. Mara nodded once. The judge continued. The marital estate will be reevaluated in full, assets subject to equitable division. Temporary control of the residence and accounts is granted to Ms. Hale. Ethan looked at her then. For the first time, his face showed something unguarded. Not rage, not disbelief. Recognition. Mara met his eyes briefly. She did not smile. When the hearing ended, the room stayed seated. No one rushed to congratulate Ethan. No one followed him out. He left alone. The district attorney's inquiry moved faster than expected. Paper trails did not argue. Signature analyses did not forget. The shell entity he had dissolved years earlier resurfaced with clarity. Charges were filed. His professional license was suspended pending investigation. The house, his house, was sold. Quietly. Mara did not attend the sale. She was busy rebuilding. Months later, the case concluded without spectacle. A plea, restitution, a sentence negotiated down but never erased. Ethan's name became something people avoided saying aloud. Mara kept the blue folder. She added nothing to it. It sat on a shelf in her new home, thin again, ordinary again. Her son once asked what it was. Proof, she said. Of what? That silence isn't empty, Mara replied. It just waits. The court record would show fairness restored, but the legacy was simpler. Power built on deception collapses under its own weight. Truth doesn't need volume, it only needs a place to stand.